Hey all, in this video we're going to be looking at Intro to Imperfect Competition. So we're going to be looking at the three different market structures: monopolies, oligopolies, and monopolistic competition. In this video particularly, we're going to be looking at why our demand and marginal revenue curves are different, and also go into the fact of why firms cannot price discriminate. Alright guys, see you in the video. So Unit 4. And so our first video on Unit 4 is all of the introduction to imperfect competition. And so here, right, imperfect competition should already be somewhat familiar to every single one of you, because we talked about the idea of it when we talked about perfect competition at the latter half of Unit 3. And so with Unit 3, right, we talked about perfect competition, and how perfect competition is one of the four different market structures. Well, in Unit 4, imperfect market structures, we're going to go over the rest of the three: monopoly, monopolistic competition, and finally ending with oligopolies. All right. So these right here, perfect competition, monopoly, monopolistic competition, oligopolies, are four different market structures. And so before we start, right, actually really get into imperfect competition, is that we have to re-go over this idea of barriers to entry. And so we talked about barriers to entry of perfect competition in the sense that with perfect competition, there are very low barriers to entry, right? If a firm is making a profit, other firms are free to enter as they wish. If a firm is making a loss, other firms are free to leave as they wish. And so with imperfect competition, right, the barriers to entry are high, right? Why? Well, because one of the reasons why imperfectly competitive markets exist is because it is not easy to enter or leave the firm if one firm is making a profit or making a loss here. And so there are different types of barriers to entry. One is going to be our high fixed startup costs. Right? So one reason as to why firms cannot easily enter into the market is because it costs too much to enter. Two is geography, ownership of raw materials, right? One reason why firms can't enter into the market is because they don't have the resources needed to produce it, right? Because one firm may already be controlling most of the ownership of raw materials there. And lastly, legal barriers, right? There may be one firm may have a patent on a particular piece of technology, which prevents other firms from entering into the market there as well. So it doesn't really matter what the type of barrier to entry is. What you guys should know and keep in mind is that there are very high barriers to entry within imperfectly competitive market structures. And so that leads us to graphing imperfect competition. So the good news is that even though there are three different market structures in Unit 4 under imperfect markets, right? Monopolies, oligopolies, and monopolistic competition. All of the graphs look the same. So the graph for a monopoly is going to look the exact same as a graph for a monopolistically competitive firm, and it's going to look the same as an oligopoly firm here. So that's going to make it slightly easier for us. And so let's compare perfect versus imperfect competition. And so perfectly competitive firms are price takers. And so because of that, right, our demand is constant and equal to marginal revenue. And so what this means here, right, is if you remember, right, our demand is our marginal revenue, which is also our price curve, which technically is also our average revenue curve, right? Our demand curve was perfectly elastic, perfectly horizontal. And that was due to the fact that perfectly competitive firms are price takers. Well, for imperfect competition, right, the firms are price makers, meaning that they can set their own prices. We said that firms in perfectly competitive markets cannot do that, right? Because if you're a price maker, you take whatever price the market dictates. But for all three of our market structures, oligopoly, monopolistic competition, and monopoly, they are all price makers. And so because of that, right, they have a downward sloping demand curve because they can just change the price as they see fit. And so it's important to know, and this is why it's bolded here, right? The marginal revenue curve is no longer equal to our demand curve. And we're going to go over why in the next couple slides. So the graph for imperfect competition, all three market structures, are going to look different compared to our graph that we talked about with perfect competition here. And so why exactly is marginal revenue less than our demand curve, right? So why? So let's look at this chart on the right. So let's say they're buying this widget, this product. And let's say at $11, no one wants to buy it. It's priced too high, so no one is going to buy this product at $11. So what does this firm need to do if they want to sell more products? Well, if you said, well, they should drop the price, you are exactly right? So here, if this firm wants to sell more products and no one's buying at $11, because in imperfect competition, these firms are price makers, they can just drop their price. So let's say this firm drops their price to $10. Right? So they drop the price to $10. And let's say one person wants to buy it. So our total revenue, which remember is just price times quantity, is 10. And so our marginal revenue is 10, right? Because from 0 to 1, right, we increase by $10. But let's say this firm wants to sell more than one good. What does this firm have to do? Well, here, if this firm wants to sell more goods, they're going to have to drop the price. And this is a typo. It shouldn't be 0, right? It should actually be $9. And so here, to sell 2 products, they have to drop the price to $9. Well, yet again, our total revenue is price times quantity. So 9 times 2, which gets us to $18. But if you notice here, our marginal revenue is no longer the same as our price, right? Our total revenue from that second product went from 10 to 18, which means our margin revenue is 8, but our price is at $9. Right? And so what does this firm have to do if they want to sell more goods? Well, they're going to have to drop the price even further, right? So let's say that they drop it to $8. At $8, 3 people want to buy it, which gets to our total revenue 24, and then our marginal revenue is $6. So yet again, notice that the price and our marginal revenue are different. And then we can continue on, so on and so on and so on, right? So why exactly is marginal revenue less than demand? It's because of something called price discrimination. We are going to say that in imperfect competition, firms cannot price discriminate. And what I mean by that is if the firm wants to sell more goods, so let's say at $11, no one wanted to buy their goods, so the firm dropped the price to 10, right? And so they sold one good, but let's say they want to sell more goods, so they drop it to 9 and 2. They cannot sell to those 2 people that bought this good at $9, one person, the same good to one person for 10 and the same good to another person for 9. So if they want to sell 2 total products, they have to drop the price for every single person to $9. Just like if they want to sell 6 units, this firm has to drop the price to $5 for every single person that is willing to buy this product. They can't charge different people different prices. And so because of that, because firms cannot price discriminate, our price and our marginal revenue are going to be 2 different curves. All right, so I want you, that's really important, right? Notice that our price and our marginal revenue are 2 separate curves here. And so what exactly do they look like? Well, for monopolies, right, the marginal revenue is always going to be less than demand. And then we can also say, right, that our demand is still equal to price. And let's write it out so there's no confusion, right? So our demand curve is still going to be price, right? That still is the same. However, the thing that's different is that A, the demand curve is downward sloping, and that our marginal revenue is different than demand because firms cannot price discriminate here. So when you're drawing your imperfectly competitive graphs, right, you have to make sure you're drawing a downward sloping demand and marginal revenue curve with the marginal revenue curve below our demand curve there. And remember, demand just equals price. And the reason why demand and price are the same is the demand curve represents how much consumers are willing to pay for at that specific quantity, right? So let's say that this is one quantity. Well, this indicates, well, the price, right, that person is willing to pay for this product, right? Let's say this is 2. Well, this right here represents the price, right, that 2 people are willing to pay for this product. And so that's why demand and price are one and the same still. All right, so elastic versus inelastic. And so by far and large, right, this is pretty simple. And this is what's in bold right here. A monopoly, which also includes our oligopolies and monopolistic competition, they are all going to produce in the elastic range of our demand curve. We're going to say the elastic range of our demand curve, right? So this portion elastic range is when our marginal revenue is positive. So in other words, we can reword this and say that a monopoly, monopolistic competition, oligopolies are only going to produce when the marginal revenue is positive. And so if you notice on this graph on the left, right, we have this point right here where marginal revenue crosses the x-axis. And we talked about this at the beginning of Unit 3, right? When marginal revenue is 0, our total revenue is at its peak. So when marginal revenue is 0, that is the last possible instance where a firm is going to be producing at. Right? So they're only going to be producing in this range right here. They aren't going to be producing where marginal revenue is negative, because at that point, total revenue starts to decrease here. Right? So all you have to pick up from this slide is the fact that these imperfectly competitive firms and markets are always going to produce in the elastic range of the demand curve. Because if these firms produce in the inelastic range, marginal revenue is negative, total revenue is negative, and they're losing profit. They're making a loss at that point, which no firm would want to do. All right, so that's it for today. I hope you guys learned a lot, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.